Bali High isn't the quiet island it used to be. An airport, an open pit mine, and massive logging operations have already reshaped its landscape. Now, rapid town expansion and booming tourism are transforming it even further. And today we're going to be looking at the next stage of that transformation and what it means for the island's future. As we run out of buildable area on the island, we can clearly see the constraints of the potential land we've got left to be building on. We have the remaining undeveloped half of Jay's Island, and behind that we have what looks like something of a big development area, but is in fact quite limited by the hilly terrain. In today's video, I'm going to be focusing on finishing that island, and we'll be looking to introduce more unique infrastructure, more tourism, and more Fiji-inspired farming. So we're going to kick things off with a little bit more infrastructure today with the creation of a seaplane terminal. So this terminal, I like to think of it being for regional traffic, sort of inter-island traffic, and it should complement the regional airport that we have at the other side of the development. For the terminal dock, I think that's what you would call it, wouldn't it? Is there a specific name for that? I'm not entirely sure. But we're going to be using some of the functional park walkways. They should give us a little bit of life here. It is essentially a tourist attraction, so we will get Sims down here having a look around and seeing what's what. Jay's been busy in editor again, and he's come up with these little seaplanes. They look absolutely fantastic. I'm not entirely sure what they're made of, but they look pretty good. So I definitely want them not floating in the mid-air, so we'll get them down on water level, and that should look pretty decent. Now, we do obviously have functional airports now, and I kind of set off this project with the idea that I would like to try and get this seaplane terminal functional as well. The first thing I tried was to try and put down an airport runway in the water and then try and camouflage it, and really, no matter what I tried, I really couldn't get it looking good. I think certainly it would work, but we'd need to kind of bring the ground level up to near water, and regardless of what we do with the surface, it was just going to stick out a mile, and I couldn't think of a good way of camouflaging it, quite frankly. So if anyone else can do it and work it out, send me a link. I'd like to see it, but I think for what I was looking for, it just wasn't gonna look good. That said, I would like to see some of these planes move round a bit, and we'll maybe try and figure that out in the next episode. Speaking of the next episode, while we're at it, we may as well just get at least the beginning of the infrastructure sorted out for that as well. So, nice little bridge, we can get that looking a little bit better later on, and that will give us a nice obvious starting point for the next episode. For the terminal, I want to keep things nice and small. Obviously it's a small scale build, and if we have a huge terminal, things are going to look just a little bit silly. I couldn't really find a single asset that I thought really fitted the bill, so we're just going to create our own essentially. We're going to grab a number of the building assets from the static ploppables, we'll get them recoloured, and we'll push them all together. We'll get something that I think fits this particular part of the island. In terms of the parking, again, I think that should be relatively modest, and we'll get some public transportation sorted out while we're at it here as well. Now, I definitely do want a little bit of an industrial town behind the island, and I think we would kind of expect to see some sort of like fuel depots and some warehousing. Certainly seems to be the case. The only substantial seaplane terminals I could find really were Mauritius and also Vancouver. So obviously the Mauritius one is going to be the one that would be kind of taking inspiration from. It's on a much larger scale than this, but we can try and pick and choose a couple of different elements and try and incorporate them into the build. So we can see here it is functional. We do have people visiting. Happy days. Now these paths realistically aren't going to be used, but they're just going to help me frame the build, and that's going to make things a little bit easier when we get around to using surfaces and all that kind of stuff. Terraforming was a little bit tricky here. I couldn't quite get it just the way I wanted it, so I'm just going to use some of Crypto Gamer's cubes, and we will just give the building essentially a corner there that's hitting the ground. Generic Lemon's surface pack is coming back into play as well, and I'm going to use that pavement one. Use that quite a lot actually in the big airport build that we did for Cape Lomond. I think you can use that in a variety of use cases, and it's definitely one of my favourite ones to be using just now. Going to extend the industrial bit out a little bit here, and we'll try and give it a little bit of its own identity and its own character, I guess, once we've added a few props. I do like the idea of having a little diner or something like that, like Trucker's Diner, and we'll get rid of all these branding elements. We don't want a bookshop out here. We want to have somewhere people can go and eat after a long drive. I went and put in a little turnaround for the buses that we're going to be having out here, and then we're going to have a simple warehousing layout, and we'll get it coloured just the way I seen it on Google Maps. Plenty of blues, both kind of aqua blues and dark blues, but I'm going to go for the kind of aqua blue. I think it kind of blends in a little bit nicer with the sea colours here. To get plenty of traffic moving and plenty of sims and plenty of activities, so I'm going to pull up StarQ's modular service blocks, or modular zoning blocks I should say rather, and we're going to give the building some purpose here. So as you can see, the zoning comes in there when we pop down the little assets, and that should all be functional there. The airport, I did chuck in a couple of blocks in there as well. Again, just a little variety. I think it was a couple of residential, really just to kind of get people down here. And just the last finishing touch on that building, I wanted to have the terminal walkway in a little bit smaller scale, and we'll just move this in, and it should line up with the door nicely. On to our next big feature of the build here, and we are going to create a campsite. Now, we're not going to leave it like that, and I'm not entirely sure why the trees came fully grown there, but let's take it back and see what we're working with. Now, this is actually quite a nice little asset on its own, but I think what I'd like to do is to extend this. Now again, given that it's just a vanilla asset, it's completely functional of course, and then we can try and make it look a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some net lanes, and I'm going to be using the ones that come as parallel, and these are just going to work as a bit of a guideline for us, and we can then draw the surfaces on top of this, and then we can just delete the net lanes, and then we've got nice tidy paths. Now you can probably guess as I get the sand surfaces out that we are going to be doing a bit of beach work as well, and it's a feature of this series really. It's been added on pretty much every build since its introduction, so this will be no different. Now I don't want this as a standalone. I think it's maybe just a little bit too small, and I definitely want to add a little bit of parking and then perhaps some better facilities adjacent to the actual park itself. Now I know that somebody did suggest this in the comments. If I can find the comment, I'll have it flashing up to say thank you for your comment and your suggestion, but if not, thank you, you probably know who you are. Now we will get some bollards in here, bollards of course, very important, and then I think at the end of each of the paths we'll just do a perfect little circle, and that will give us a little bit of a focal point on each of the edges of the park. So again, same idea with the net lanes here. We're just going to be using it for the shapes, and then we'll fill it in, and then we can just delete the net lanes, and again we'll sort of rinse and repeat each of these sections. Now once I got that little sand section done, I can't help but think that it looks like some kind of creature, doesn't it? So tell me what you think it looks like in the comments. I'm not entirely sure what the hell it's supposed to be, but there it is. The campfire site, I think there's a real lack of camping. So let's get some tents added, and let's get plenty of them as well. Now I can imagine that this could be a fairly pleasant place, but that said, it's pretty near the airport, quite near an industrial spot, and perhaps that's maybe some lower land value development, you know, that's been put to action down here. Now another downside potentially of having that campsite in that location is having industry next door. Well, agricultural industry I guess is what I'm talking about here. Now I'm not going to do any livestock, which I suppose is probably going to be a good thing, but I would imagine that potentially from crop spreading there might be some issues there, although I have absolutely zero knowledge whatsoever on Fijian farming methods, so there might not be an issue. Now, although I have no idea about the farming methods, I did at least Google a crop or two and see what they grow down there, and I found a thing called Dalo, and the reason why I'm putting that in is that it's going to give us some really nice leaves, basically. That's what I wanted to have in some of the surfaces, and I'm going to use some of the farming surfaces by Broman as well. But first we need to get things fenced in, and we'll just use the net lanes on this one and try and get it nicely enclosed. So the obvious ones to be using here are the wooden farm ones, and for where we have the trucks parked up, I think something maybe a little bit more secure, and we'll go for the kind of higher industrial ones. Once all of these are done, I will complement it with some of these smaller scale electricity cables. They always look good, and we have them right the way through the island as well, which is very much what you would expect on development of this scale. So let's have a quick peek and see how things are looking. I think we're looking okay so far. Yeah. So we're on to the farming bit now, and what we're going to be doing is lay out our crop lines. Now the direction of the lines is going to be dictated by the very first surface that you put down. So as soon as you start using the tool and draw your line out, that is basically going to dictate how the lines are done. So with this one here, I wanted it going from the road and kind of up and down the hill, and I think that is looking pretty nice. With the lines the way that I want them, I just want to get the surface just right as well, and I think this is pretty much the one I'm looking for. Now here is the leafy crop that I'm talking about, the Dalo. I think that's the pronunciation anyway, and again that will give us some nice little bit of interest here, breaks up all the brown, and at least we've got a nice realistic crop that you do find in this part of the world. Let's give that a quick spin. Yep, happy with that. I've just gone ahead and done the other one already, and again I wanted to try and contrast the lines on it, so I've kind of got that running at a 90-degree angle for the first one. I think we're going to go all green here, and we'll use some of the apple trees, and I think that will look pretty nice. Apple trees don't grow natively in Fiji, but they can be found in certain parts of the island, so I am going to run with that. Adding a little bit of contrast, I'm going to be using some of these decals by Static Noise. Going to use the line tool, and we're going to just add sort of like a bit of a worn path, I guess, through each of the columns. Adding that little bit of darkness against the light stuff really does go a long way. Now swinging back over to our campsite, we're just going to use those same decals, and we'll create a little bit of a path network. Nothing too fancy, and again it saves us having to draw out different surfaces, and it looks quite nice as well actually. Now I want to get it enclosed. Again, nothing too wild, we'll just be using the line tool, a few props here, and we should get a nice little effect going around the building. Extending out on that, we're going to run around the side and the front, and we'll get some more of those bollards in place, and it does kind of look like that little building belongs there, doesn't it? Now that we have the major pieces in place, the next part of the jigsaw here is to try and get everything fenced off. And again, much like we did in the farm there earlier on, I want to try and get appropriate fencing and walling for each individual part of the build. So along the airport here, I think it makes sense to try and get something a little bit more concrete. So we're going to use that sort of white or cream brick building, or fence, wall. I did initially put a wall here, but I think I am going to change that, and we'll get it as a bit of a key wall instead. It'll add a little bit of height, and it will make that sort of drop in elevation a little bit more obvious when we're looking at it. For where we might expect some security type fencing, then we'll use some of the industrial sort of wire fencing. Sort of makes sense, I reckon, as well. That would be a little bit harder to jump over, I guess, and it will keep our very modest sort of delivery area nice and secure here as well. For the gate, I'm just going to use an alternative industrial fence here, and that should look the part. So around the back of our little industrial place, we're going to add a few extra props here that I think make sense. We've got quite a bit of surfacing to do here, and obviously the main terminal is what we're going to be looking at just now. We've got a couple of fire assets here, the tower and the one beside it, and they come with some really nice tiling surfaces. So what I'm going to do, rather than using a custom surface here or a mod, I'm just going to use the one that we have in game and just extend that out. Now the paving that I mentioned earlier on is going to come into play, and we're just going to use that as essentially a frame. We'll get it all filled up, and then we've got a nice uniform surface throughout the entire terminal development. Along the main road, we're going to be using Elgendo's dirt roads, and these are fantastic. Now, I have this basically running from the main town right the way around to where we have our activity zone, you know, and for some reason I ended it there. I think I wanted to sort of have mud coming off, you know, the mountain, where we have the mountain bike. So I decided to switch back to the original one, and here where we have the raised roads, I'm going to use the move it functionality of manipulation mode, and we are just going to raise that and try and get a nice raised gravel effect on the start of the bridge. Now, I might bring that all the way over in the next episode, we'll see, but I think it does look much better, doesn't it? Real nice actually, a lot of detail there where perhaps you might not necessarily realise where you can add it. Along the main drag into the airport, I think I decided to use, instead of dirt roads, I wanted it to have a concrete, but we're going to kind of beat it up a little bit, and we'll use some Static Noises decals. Pretty time consuming putting these in, but I think they are worth it. You could probably do this with a line tool, but I wasn't having really much joy, so I just decided to put them in by hand. And on the other side of the road, I'm going to sort of break things up a little bit. We're going to use a smaller one, and we'll just drag that along right the way through. Now we do have some opportunities to add a little bit more patchwork, and we'll do exactly that. Now we can see that's coming along quite nicely, a little bit patchwork. We've used the same on one side, we've kind of changed it up a little bit on the other, and we can add a few more decals and really add a bit of variation and a bit of randomness in that as well just shortly. I'm going to use a little bit of a combination here over at the industrial estate. I think at the edges where we have kind of essentially run out of concrete or asphalt, I am going to add a little bit of dirt and a little bit of sand and just kind of break things up a little bit. So with the dirt in place, the sand in place, and then we give some of the road treatment, I think that looks quite natural, doesn't it? Pretty happy with that. I think that's a decent effort. So as we're going through some of the detail and effort, I just wanted to say thanks very much guys for tuning in and watching it if you've made it this far. It's always really appreciated. Again, special thank you to our members, YouTube members and our Patreon members. Hugely appreciated. It really does help the channel out tremendously guys. Thank you very much. Now let's just sort out the recolouring for these planes. I want them all nice and white. They should look pretty good. And what I decided to do here was to try and actually use a little bit of a heart shape here. And it is for a good reason. That crop that we spoke about earlier on, that root crop Dalo, it's got essentially large heart-shaped leaves. So I thought as a little bit of a homage to that, I decided to use that as a bit of an inspiration for some of our decoration we have alongside our bus stop here. And while we're at it, we may as well add a little splash of colour on the road as well. I think that looked pretty nice. Now I do want to just make it a little bit worn, so we're going to be adding some of Elgendo's stuff here. One of the decals covers up the pedestrian crossing quite nicely, and again we'll add some of his patches and road cracks and whatnot as well. And I think we're going to be adding a little bit of sullies here as well, the kind of smaller ones, and that will give us a nice bit of a mix and a match, and we should be able to get a nice little bit of texture where normally we wouldn't have much going on. So I'm going to quickly get the rest of the terminal surroundings put in place, and then we're going to be working on quite a big feature really at the front of the airport, which I'll talk you through. So I've deliberately went quite light on the use of these boulders, you know, throughout the build itself. I'd much prefer to have a nice, golden sandy beach there, rather than the boulders. But I think they do have their place every now and again. And I think here at the entrance of the airport, it kind of makes sense. Now I could have went and sort of built a bit of a quay wall, but I'd have preferred to kind of use the resources that we potentially have, as part of the build. So what I decided to do was to really just make a really massive sort of breakwater, I guess. That's probably the wrong term, isn't it? A breakwater is normally extruding out, in the water itself. I'm sure somebody in the comments will have a better descriptive word for it than I will, but yeah. We're just basically going to put a ton of boulders down, going to recolour them so they have that sort of volcanic colour as well, which I think is a bit of a better fit. And then much like the build on the other side of the island here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sort of filling the gaps with the rubble, the vegetation, which will sink into the ground. It does look a little bit better, so quite a bit of a sink on that one, down to about -2 meters, and it should look pretty good once it's done. Now, if you're in charge of any of them planes, you probably want to be careful you don't get too close to the shore. At this point of the build, it's really all going to be about making sure that all the surfaces and everything are done, all the road networks are essentially covered, any obvious detailing bits and pieces that need to be done, now's the time to get it sorted out as well, and essentially basically just kind of wrap up the build and make sure that we've got everything looking just the way that we want it. It's always worthwhile just to kind of take a step back and just sort of get an idea of what needs to be done. Along the edge of the build where we have a lot of the agriculture, what I'm going to do, rather than do a beach, I am going to do a thick vegetation of essentially oaks is what we're going to be using here. I'm still going to keep them sunken just like what we have at the front of the airport. But if you have a look at the south coast of Fiji, you'll see that there's quite a number of individual patches where they have really thick dark vegetation just like this. So I do want to try and represent at least part of that on the island, and I think this is a pretty good spot to have it as well. I think it makes sense where we have industrial and maybe a bit of agriculture that we maybe have that sort of natural barrier perhaps along it as well. Now of course I want to try and break things up, and the best way of doing that in this build is going to be through the palm trees. So I'm going to use a nice mix of a few of the really tall ones, and then directly under that we'll kind of have a little bit of a cluster of the smaller ones as well. And again, gives us a nice wee bit of contrast. Having a look on Google Maps, if we scroll right into these kind of areas, it does look like there is a pretty good mix of vegetation there as well. So I think it's realistic. I hope it is. That's certainly my intent. And where we have a little bit of a gap here, rather than messing about with the net lane, we'll just stick a little bit of vegetation, and I think that looks pretty nice too. So let's just get the last of the detailed vegetation put in place, and then we can move on to the next bit. course, no episode of Bali High is complete without some beach work. So again, I've covered it in tons of videos. I'm not going to go through it again. I'm just going to leave it with you guys, and then we'll catch up. And we're actually going to have a little bit of an extra bit of development here once we're done as well. So I'll leave this one with you, and I'll catch up with you in a second. So that final last bit of development is just going to be a small settlement for perhaps locals or some workers, I guess, as well. We're going to use some of the same assets that we have in the other residential parts, and then we're going to use the same sort of colour palette as well. So we get the blues and the reds in, makes sense. We'll get it enclosed with a fairly decent bit of bush and vegetation, and then what we'll do is once it's in place, we'll get some of the smaller trees in, and that looks a little bit more to scale for some of these smaller buildings. I really wanted to extend what we have done in the other parts of the campsite as well, so we're going to use some of those decals by Static Noise, and we'll just create these little paths. Now you could make them functional, you know, with the invisible path networks, but at the end of the day, there has to be something for them to go to at the end. There isn't going to be any roads going out here for, you know, for obvious reasons, and really we would need the roads to maybe add some of Star Q's, you know, service blocks or something like that. So until such point that they can be added to path networks, then it's not really an option at this stage of the game. At this point now, what we still need to do really is some of the sort of final touches and detailing and kind of softening up edges and making sure that everything looks a little bit more natural more than anything else. So I'm going to do that through a variety of props and decals and all the rest of it. Obviously you can see that we're, you know, going to do the sand here, but there's still a bit of vegetation, still a bit of prop work to be done, and then we can have a look at the final product and really just see how things actually panned out once we've got that final push in the detailing done. now we can take a minute or two and just check out the final result, and I think that's looking pretty decent, to be honest. The beaches there that we kind of spent quite a bit of time putting in, I think were worth it. We've got those kind of sandbars, and we get rid of the little grass island, and I think that was definitely the right choice. I reckon all of that stonework and then the extra work we did to kind of blend it in, again, I think that was worth it as well. It certainly beats a boring quay wall there, you know, down at the dock, and those planes are looking pretty good as well, aren't they? Happy days. I think one thing I really enjoy about this particular build is that really vast majority of it is all functional as well. Might not necessarily get those planes going, but we got helicopters in the go, which is kind of nice. But yeah, as I said, I might have a play about with that again and see if there's some way I can try and get the airport runways looking good. As I said, it was just too jarring and it just didn't look good, you know, it stuck out a mile. From a vegetation point of view, the trees, bushes, and then having a bit of a break from the usual sort of sandy beaches by adding those bushes and keeping a bit of greenery, really, I think is a nice little contrast to the usual stuff. Our Dalo fields seem to be doing pretty good. That looks pretty nice, doesn't it? I think they're ready for harvest pretty soon. Extending out that campfire site with actual tents, I think would be worthwhile. Hopefully the waves stay down. I think they might have a bit of an issue if there's a bit of a choppy sea out here right enough. So we've had a varied little build today, and if you've enjoyed it and you want to see a bit more, check out this video where I build out the island's main airport right here in Ballyhigh.